Thank you, Anya. I just want to note that Michael Regan's rocking the sort of Zelensky T-shirt look.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, just, you know... Thank you for coming, Michael. I am Michael Robotham. I've been a resident here for 25 years. I've loved Mackellar for even longer than that. When I first met Vivian, my now wife, I was 23 and she was 20, and she house sat a house up in sort of Whale Beach, and for a boss of hers. And I remember going up there and looking at this amazing view out over the Pacific through one balcony, and then from the other balcony looked out over Pittwater, and saying to her, if I ever achieve my dream of being a full-time writer, and I'd dreamed about it since I was 12, I said, I want to live in a place like this. I managed to achieve that ambition. I love Mackellar, I love the people, I love the landscape, be it the bush or the forests or the beaches, and I love the people. Now, as Anu said, before becoming a writer, I was a journalist, and I'm a passionate advocate in free speech, and everyone has a right to an opinion, even if I disagree with them. So tonight, all I ask is that everyone be civil and respectful, and that everyone show each other mutual respect when it comes to the questions. Okay, let's get down to it. I'm Graham Norton. There's no big red chair, so I'm not going to tip Sophie backwards. There are quite a number of politicians I wouldn't mind tipping backwards out of a big red chair. But first, what I really want to do for a session like this is first of all get you to know who Sophie is, and then we'll get into talking about, you know, what Sophie's policies are and what she wants to bring to Mackellar as an independent. But first of all, Sophie, tell us where you grew up and went to school.
Well, that's an easy one. I can answer that. So I grew up on the North Shore, grew up in Turramurra, and went to school at the local public school, bush school, which was fabulous, and then went to Abbotsleigh. But I was very lucky in that our family had a property west of Bathurst, and so we spent all our holidays up there and really had the opportunity to run wild. We had 6 horses that were half wild. We helped with the shearing, and so I really had a blessed...
So when you say we, how many siblings?
Oh. Okay, so I have, I'm one of 4. I'm the youngest of 4 children. I've got an older sister and then 2 brothers.
Is that why you became such a fast runner?
Well, I became a fast runner because one of the brothers was trying to clobber me most of the time, I think, so I had to learn how to run fast, yeah.
And get fed, probably. Okay, obviously athletics is a big part of your life, has been. So, how did Little Athletics start?
So I think it was my mother having 4 children and thinking it'd be a good idea to get us all out of the house and get some of the energy out. So all four of us were sent off to Little Athletics on a Saturday morning. I think I started there when I was 5 and enjoyed it, loved it. It was just part of our life.
When did you know you could run fast? Were you winning from... Right?
Well, I was almost winning. I was always up there. But then one holiday, I think we had a holiday down here on the beaches, and I think I must have surfed and body surfed the whole time and came back to Little Athletics and suddenly was winning. But I think it was that fitness and just sort of went from there, and I think it surprised me as much as anybody else.
So tell me, who were you... back in those days when you got into running competitively then, who were your compatriots? Who were you running against? Who would we know that you would have run against? Okay,
so we didn't run the same event, but Melinda Gainsford, we had the same coach from the same age, so we trained down here at Narrabeen. Also toured, I guess, with Kathy Freeman. Yes, and actually she was a 100, 200 metre runner, so I did beat her over the 400 when she first started. Claim to fame.
Your claim to fame. You say your claim. So you beat her, then she went to the longer distances and you were in trouble.
And then she went up to the 400. But I was mainly an 800 metre runner. But we did, I was part of the team that competed at the World Junior Championships, and our 4x400 metre relay team actually won, and that record still stands. But the funny thing is Kathy was in that team, but she wasn't in the 4x400 metre relay team. Yeah.
Yeah. So that record still stands?
Yeah, over 30 years. Yeah.
Over 30 years?
Yeah.
Way to go, way to go. when did medicine enter the... I mean, your dad was a doctor, so was it always just... I mean, that's obvious, no-brainer. Were you always going to be a doctor? Did you grow up around them, or...?
Yes, none of my siblings are medical, but I think at a young age I did decide that I wanted to do medicine. I think, and I'm not 100% sure why, I think as a child you're fairly naive, but I did have this sense that I wanted to help people. I mean, you're quite young when you think that, but... And also I could sense that my father, he was the local GP in our area, and he had a lot of respect, but not just the respect. I could see in people's faces quite often the gratitude that they had for him, and I think that sort of, I must have absorbed that somehow, yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I know a lot of people do follow on from what their parents do, but you see the worst side of it as well. I mean, you must have seen him under pressure at times or upset at times when things hadn't, unless it was the sort of man that didn't bring his work home. No,
my father was very quiet. He didn't talk about... I mean, he talked about the funny times and the fun times, but if he'd had a difficult day, we wouldn't really know about it, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. You studied at Sydney University. Was the intention to specialise or be a GP? Where did you... I mean, you obviously did locums around the traps as well.
I wasn't, when I was studying medicine, I wasn't sure, but I think I was excited by the concept of becoming a specialist. I was thinking about this the other day, what sort of persuaded me to become a GP. And really it was when I was living overseas with my husband, and we were out, as I've just described, I'm part of a medical network, with my family here in Australia. But when we were living overseas in England, I didn't have that network, and I had a health issue, and suddenly I realised I was at the mercy of, I didn't know who, and I didn't know the system at all. And I went and saw a GP there, and that's when I realised how important GPs are in advocating for you and looking after you as a whole person and your well-being. And I really appreciated this GP's, working for me on my behalf and looking after me, and I realised what an important role it was. So that's what convinced me.
Yeah, but I mean, I look at it and think, as a GP, I can't even imagine, what comes across your... into your surgery every day, whether it be, domestic violence or abuse, or delivering horrendous news to people, it can be very, very confronting. These are people that, as a family GP, you get to know, it takes a particular sort of person to have the strength of mind to actually cope with that. Did you, how did you, those confronting moments, what got you through those times?
Well, I think, it is very difficult at times. Those are the hardest times when you're breaking bad news. It's and you're thinking, right, okay, here we go. But I think the main thing is people, they need to know that you're on their side, and that they know if they trust you, then you're the right person to break that news and to help them through it. So usually it's good when you've got an ongoing relationship with people, because they know they've got that trust in you, and they know that you are going to do the best for them. And the other thing that's really important being a GP, one is listening, and the other thing is collaborating. So as a GP these days, you don't tell people what to do, you must do this. Everyone knows that they've got to stop smoking or whatever. You work with them to work out which is the best way forward for them. You provide the evidence and the different options, and you work together. It's more like being a coach or a support network or something like that. So look, it's a really incredible job, and it's a real honour to have people come to you and put their trust in you to help them through those really difficult times. And I loved it. It's an amazing job.
What about during COVID? What were the extra stresses during that,
Well, I think it was like everyone. I think that there was this sense of bewilderment. People didn't know what was happening, or, right at the beginning. There was a lot of confusion. I think there was a lot of fear. I think doctors were very worried because nobody knew anything about this virus really at that point, and we didn't have the protective equipment. We were going down to hardware stores trying to find, vacuum cleaner bags so we could make our own masks. It was just crazy stuff, and we were very fortunate that it didn't end up the deluge of patients that we were expecting. but there was a lot. It was a difficult time because the government used to run pandemic preparedness exercises up until 2008, and that was the last time that they had run. So there was this real sense of lack of preparedness. One, as I said, with all the equipment, but two, the communication. We would, as GPs, and I know the pharmacists were similar, would find out about what plans had changed, and the plans were often changing daily when the patients came in and told us, you know. Wow. So it was like, there would be an announcement made, go call your GP, but the GPs wouldn't know about it. And so that was very difficult, and just managing people's expectations. And as I said, there was people very fearful as well. And one of the things that I was worried about initially was a lot of older patients who live on their own, and you know, the initial lockdowns and the hoarding and things like that. And I just wanted to make sure that my older patients who I knew were somewhat isolated would have somebody to look after them. So I basically rang them all and gave them my phone number and said, we'll look after you. And it was nice. People just to have that sort of sense of security in a way. Yep.
I know before that you'd been working in emergency medicine, a different set of challenges. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so emergency is quite incredible. Actually, the thing about emergency that you learn is to work really well in a team. It's a team job, and everyone has their role. And the other thing I would say is that you have to learn how to communicate really effectively, because people's lives actually depend on your communication being effective and you getting your message across. So that's something that's quite amazing. But I was thinking you learn how to remain calm under pressure, but actually calm's not the right word. It's more centred and focused, because you need to be able to step into that role that you've been trained for, and you need to still be able to make those critical decisions under pressure. So yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
I mean, that idea of, you know, on any given day you don't know what's going to come through the door. You don't know how many people are going to come, whether it's just going to be, you know, the normal walking wounded, or whether it's going to be a major accident where suddenly it's all hands on deck, you know, and having to make critical decisions about who gets cared for first, who to triage it to the point where saying, this person I can save, that person can wait a little longer for treatment because this one needs it quicker.
Exactly, it's difficult, and I know that was a concept that doctors at the start of the pandemic were really concerned about, that choice, who gets the care and who gets to wait. So one of the issues with the health system at the moment is the fact that the number of beds that we have in our public our hospital systems is not keeping up with either the growth in population or the ageing population. So we've got more and more people turning up to emergency, and less beds per capita. So what you've probably heard about happening is the ambulances being ramped in emergency, and that used to happen a lot even years ago.
It was a big issue in the South Australian election just recently.
Yeah, the ramping of, because then that holds the ambulances up. They can't actually go out on call when they're needed, because they're waiting for their patients in their ambulances to get seen by a doctor or get triaged, which is a real issue.
Okay, we've ticked some serious boxes here for a strong local candidate. Champion runner, doctor, you know, post-grad degree from Oxford University, mother of four. Three, sorry. God, that's wrong, bad research. Mother of three. You know, you're not pregnant, are you? No. Good. Okay. Okay, but seriously, married to an ex-wallaby, come on, come on. You know, tell us about Adam. Where did you meet?
Oh, right. So we just met, as you know, you usually do, through a friend. We were at a dinner party, someone's birthday dinner party together, and I think we both arrived a bit late, so ended up sitting next to each other. And Adam was quite interested in the running that I did, and I think he became quite enamoured with the fact that I could run a faster 400 metres than him. But he was a rugby player. He was very lucky. Rugby union turned professional just when he was at the right age. He'd just finished university, and then the Super 12, I think it was back then, started up, and he was he was able to go down to Canberra and play with the Brumbies down there, and that was a lot of fun. It was just a wonderful time.
I mean, were you a rugby fan? Had you heard of him? When he
No,
introduced himself,
no,
did you say,
heard of
you're the rugby player?
No, I hadn't. I hadn't at all. But he wasn't, he was playing club rugby at that point. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And did you, I mean, if I was to describe some of the rules of rugby, would you have any idea what I was talking? Can you now watch a game of rugby and know when he says that's a dive, not a drive, what he's talking about?
I watched a lot of rugby. It was a lot of fun, but I think did spend a lot with the Brumbies. It was quite an amazing setup because a lot of the players in the Brumbies team were from out of state. They all lived together and so there was this really good team camaraderie, but also families and girlfriends were always involved, and so we had a good time. So there was often champagne up in the upper levels, and one time I think Adam got carried off with concussion or something, but I didn't notice because I was enjoying the champagne and.
God, whereas no, I just
poor Adam.
No, it's my mother would sort of run onto when my father run onto the field and what a thump the referee, So I mean that took you to you went to Oxford just to post sort of graduate studies. Adam was also in England at the same time, so it took you abroad, which was lovely. We're getting to the nitty gritty now because really. The question we have to ask is why would someone, world record holding athlete,
okay, no.
mother of three,
that's one more correction.
They can't take you the world record. It's not a world record. It's a record that stands.
Australian record, not
Australian
world record.
All right, there we go. Oxford academic, medical professional. Spent 20 years working as a doctor. Why step into public life and run as an independent?
A lot of people ask that question, why on earth would you blow up your life like this? But it comes down to a sense of duty, really. We all, if you have children, we all spend most of our time trying to ensure that they have the best life possible. And for me, I think from the day that my son was born, I was concerned that we were leaving them a future that wasn't the same safe and secure future that we had enjoyed. So that's that sort of sense as a parent that you have a duty to care for, not only my own children, but the other children in the community. But then also as a doctor, I mean, I spend my days trying to look after people and advocate for people and care for them. And I also had this growing unease that we were missing the biggest thing that was going to affect people's health and well-being. And actually, in the meantime, the WHO has said that climate change is the greatest threat to human health. So having that concept behind me, thinking we're missing the biggest thing we need to be acting on. So there's this sense of duty, one as a parent, two as a human, and three as a doctor, to really make a difference to the future that we're creating for everyone, for everyone in this community, everyone in Australia, and basically globally as well. We have a duty to act.
So it wasn't an overnight decision. I know you were very involved in the community up until you deciding to run as an independent. I mean, you have the Blue Dot, the Our Blue Dot. Tell us a bit about the Our Blue Dot campaign.
So as I described, I had this growing sense that climate change was coming over the horizon, but our national leaders were not acting on it, and that creates a fair amount of distress for a lot of people. And I was looking around for somebody to lead, some action on climate change locally. And then I had a conversation with my 12-year-old son and his friends, and they were asking me about it, and having a gentle conversation. I said, climate change is something that you kids are going to have to deal with. And this beautiful 12-year-old boy turned around to me and said, very earnestly said, yes, because you adults have failed us. And I went, oh, right. So that was a wake-up call, really, to say, well, I am one of the adults in the room. I can do a lot more than what I'm doing. And it's funny, actually, as you said, it's a bit of a journey, and I'm a bit of a Tolkien fan as well. So I think that the journey is a bit like when Gandalf says to Frodo right at the beginning, he says, it's a dangerous thing to go out your front door and step onto the road, because if you don't watch your feet, there's no knowing where you might get swept off to. And I think that's what happened with me. I made a decision back then, talking to the 12-year-old kids, that I would step out onto the road and do something that I could. And it started, as you said, with a local sustainability group, and then
that was focused on
reducing carbon emissions and waste locally, both in our own lives and in our community. And that was really wonderful, because a lot of people jumped on board, and we're really excited to be finally able to be doing something. And it was a really important lesson, because I realised that my language had changed from we should be doing this, someone should be doing this, to I'm doing this, and everyone's response changed from yes, we should be doing something, to how can I help? And all of a sudden there was action, and we really also benefited from the fact that when you start acting, you start feeling hopeful, and when you're acting together, things start to happen, and that's that step onto the road.
And so, what was the step from there to Voices of Mackellar?
So we were hearing quite frequently that a lot of people were feeling ignored, not heard, taken for granted by our local federal representative, and for me, that's what we were hearing a lot, and through networking, just with other groups who were working on climate change and emissions, we heard about. Actually, we met some of the people who had worked on Zali's campaign, and they described this whole Voices movement. And we have somebody here in the audience, Louise, who started Voices of Warringah back in 2018, and this amazing grassroots movement that happened in Warringah, because people felt that they were no longer being represented in a genuine way. So we'd heard about this Voices movement, and then for me, I think crunch time came, and some of you may remember when our local member sent out a survey to find out what was important to the people in his electorate. And this was in February 2020, at the very end of the Black Summer bushfires. And we were still breathing in the smoke, and then of that list of 15, 20 things, climate change was not mentioned. And that upset a lot of people, including me. And so when Jason then soon afterwards had a meet-up with people in the community, with constituents, and everyone was wanting to talk about climate change because we were still breathing in the smoke of the fires. And I said to him at the end of that, there was a lot of distress there, but I said, Jason, I would love to hear your voice in the media. I would love to hear from you if you really want action on climate change. And the answer that came back to me really was what triggered me into moving the next step forward, because he said, well, the problem is you can't mention the words climate change in the party room because the Queensland MPs jump up and down. And I thought, well, how is that representing us here in Mackellar? Because it is an issue that's very important to us. Yeah.
It's interesting, when I first met you, you were looking for a candidate. I remember saying to you at the time, why don't you run as a candidate? And you were saying, you didn't say no, but you were saying, I want to see if we can't find, I want to canvass, and I want to look at all the possible candidates before, making a decision. You made the decision to jump.
Yeah. Look, it was interesting. We initially, when through the Voices movement, we heard frequently that people were hoping for authentic representation with an independent, like what had happened in Warringah with Zali, like what was happening with Helen Haynes, and before that, Cathy McGowan down in Indi in regional Victoria. So we were hearing this over and over and over again. So then Anjo Geddes, who introduced us, and we stepped aside from Voices and started up the the Mackellar Rising group, and that was all about bringing people together, because you can't manufacture a grassroots movement, but you can tap into one. And we definitely knew that there was a sentiment very broadly across this community that was felt that they weren't being genuinely represented, and so that's where that came from. And one of our jobs was to find, and we initially thought, let's find a high profile candidate, because it is actually quite difficult for an independent to get in. And if you have a high-profile candidate, that helps because people obviously know them already. But what we heard repeatedly, again, from the community was, no, we want somebody who is genuinely one of us. Would you do it?
Well, I'm very glad you did. Now, the literature, we see the T-shirts, people wearing the T-shirts, and there are 3 words. There could be a 4th word on there, I know, but I will get to it. You've touched, there's climate, there's integrity, and there's health. You've touched on climate, but I want you to touch a bit more on that, because we have obviously both major parties have very similar targets when it comes to emissions going forward. Different timetables, but basically similar sort of targets. Whether you believe they're genuine in those targets or not, or their pamphlet or plan, whatever. But where do you stand on? Obviously, you want something done. What targets would you set?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I'm standing, is because this decade is the critical decade to get action on climate change. We need to really set those targets, legislated targets, and we need to start acting on it. And it's not just environmentalists, it's the WHO, it's all the health bodies, it's the AMA, it's all the different specialist colleges of medicine. And you may have read yesterday, I think, or today, the former defence chiefs have come out and said that we need to act on climate change as it's the greatest threat to our security and our future. And it goes on. And we've got the Greg Mullins, who is the ex Commissioner for the Fire and Rescue, New South Wales, and they are also just warning us about the future that we are looking towards. But so that to get action on this needs to happen this decade. We can't wait any longer. So I am standing for a minimum 2030 emissions reduction target of at least 50%. That's probably the minimum that we need to get to start this ball rolling. And really, we need to change our mindset. And zero emissions by 2050 is too little too late to keep this as a livable climate.
And for people that say, that's sort of, because obviously the counter-argument, it's wrecking the economy and whatnot. You actually see this as opportunity rather than a negative, don't you?
Oh, look, it's a huge opportunity. And then you've got all the states that are on board, and you've got the Business Council of Australia as well, which is representing the major organisations and industry groups. They are also calling for a 50% carbon emissions reduction target, because they know that we need to diversify our economy, because we need to, as you said, ride the clean energy wave. We need to come out on top of this opportunity. At the moment, they're suggesting that we are being left behind and that we're going to miss out. What we need to do is to invest now in the renewable energy so that we do create those high-tech, clean energy jobs which have high income, so that we can maintain our standard of living and that we can export renewable energy and other types of energy as well. But the way we're going, if we don't diversify, we're going to be left behind.
Yeah. So again, this is this idea of all we hear is gas-led recoveries and sort of, another coal shipment to Ukraine. Thank you, Whitehaven saying thank you, government. But it's a case of, you see that the benefits of this are going to far outweigh even any short-term pain that we potentially could suffer.
Most definitely. If we don't act, you can already see how many billions the floods have cost and the fires have cost. There's going to be a huge, clean-up bill year after year after year, which we won't be able to recover from. So actually not acting is going to cost us a lot more. New South Wales they've set up their renewable energy zones, and they say by 2030 there's going to be 32 billion invested into New South Wales, plus thousands of jobs. And that's what we're hoping for. This is an opportunity to create new jobs that are well paid and will help us maintain our current standard of living. So yes.
Yes, the next word on that T-shirt is integrity. Obviously I don't need to explain to everyone here over the last number of years, whether it come to our state or federally, that there have been huge issues when it comes to corruption, pork barrelling, whatever. I mean, we still don't, despite it being promised, have a federal ICAC. It was promised by the current government that there would be a federal ICAC by now. Before the next election, there's not one. What would you like to see happen?
Oh, definitely 100% a federal ICAC. As we know, most of the states have ICACs in anti-corruption commissions, and as you were mentioning as well, most people are not happy with the fact that public money is being spent not in the public interest but to win more votes for the government of the day at the next election. And Australians are pretty fair-minded, and that's not really, I think, on in most people's minds. We have been promised a federal ICAC, and what I'm concerned about is a lot of the poor decision making that's been happening comes from the fact that our democracy has actually been warped. So we need to strengthen our democracy and make sure it remains strong into the future, and also strengthen those institutions around our democracy. There's been money cut from the Auditor General's sector, so they can't do their job properly. The other thing that we also need to look at, as well as the anti-corruption body, is taking the influence of money out of political decision making. It's got way too much. We most of the time don't know how much money different organisations are giving to different, political candidates and parties, and what influence that has on decision making. The other thing is we need a lot more transparency around lobbying and lobbyists as well. So there's a lot of there's a great deal of lack of transparency, which is not helping, our democracy at all. So one of the first things I think it's important to do is strengthen those democratic institutions. And I should say as well that it's been the independents who've led the way on the federal ICAC. That's not something that the government would be happy to be talking about. As you can see, they've been sort of dragged there somewhat kicking and screaming, and hopefully we do actually get there. But I do think we need the influence and the pressure from more independents and more people who are... And
this is Helen Haynes and her bill that she didn't get through, but she very...
No, she didn't get through, but she keeps trying.
Yes.
But they've put a lot of time and effort into creating the best model for the Anti-Corruption Commission, and she's the one that has shown the leadership, and interestingly, it's come from her.
And what do you think? What do politicians fear most about a national ICAC then? I mean, is it simply politics as usual? I mean,
I don't know, but I think they're worried about being caught out. I think that there's a lot of there's a lot that goes on that we don't know about. So that lack of transparency and where the money's coming from.
They want politics as usual. They want to be able to spend this money without the oversight. They want to be able to channel money into marginal seats without not necessarily where it's best spent, but where it's going to win them votes.
So it's I mean, you, as a representative, as a parliamentarian, you have a duty to work in the best interest of your electorate and the community. And it's when that's exposed that you haven't been acting in the interests of the community, you've been acting in self-interest. That's where the conflict comes in.
Okay, health. I mean, this is obviously a matter very close to your heart. You've spent your career working, in that sphere. What would you like to see happen?
A lot. I'm about to announce my health policy on Friday, so you'll be able to see lots in there. But there's a number of different things that we need to see action on, and one of the biggest ones is mental health, both adult and youth mental health. As a GP, I'm very aware that there is a dire lack of services, and people are really struggling because they can't access the care that they need. And so there needs to be a lot of work around increasing the services that are available, and a lot of investment. One of the things we would like to see is an inpatient youth, young people or adolescent unit for mental health here on the Northern Beaches. And also just expanding that mental health workforce. So everything from peer support workers through to psychiatrists. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And even we heard recently that 1 in 5 young people had considered suicide or had suicidal thoughts in the last 2 years. That is
COVID. One of the it's, as you say, it's one of the great issues through COVID has been mental health of teenagers. you know. And it's one of those issues, though. It's when it comes down to the funding of these things, though, is it more money spent on health funding, or is it better targeted?
I think one of the things is it's probably interestingly, I spoke to Australians for Mental Health the other day, and that's with Professor Pat McGorry and Ian Hickey as well. They were basically saying that we just need to target, we need to plan. There's no coordination between the different levels of healthcare governance. And so they're saying we actually don't need a huge injection of money, but it just needs to be run properly. And one of the things that they're calling for is we have we know all about waiting lists for elective surgery, and that means that we have information about that, who's missing out, where they need to go, all that type of thing. But we don't have a waiting list for people who are waiting to see a mental health care specialist. So that's one of the things that they want to start with, just so that we have that information. Yeah. And then also building a number of other resources, like digital resources, which can hold people over in between, you know, seeing their GP and also seeing their specialist as well. But we've only talked about mental health, but there's lots of other things.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
There is a fourth word which I know some of the independents have added to their list, which is equality. It's not as though you've left yours off, you've gone for the three words, but there could be a fourth word there. Talk to me about the need for equality.
Yes, definitely. I think after last year, a lot of us, you know, we realise that we've still got a way to go. We have come a long way, but we still have a way to go. And I think that the way forward now is constructive, you know, working together. I think men and women would like to see more balance in Parliament as a starting place, set the standard. That would be wonderful. And then more respect and balance in workplaces all across Australia as well. And so starting with the implementation of the Jenkins Review as well, just bringing in those recommendations both in Parliament and also making safe workplaces across the country. Yep. Mm. Yeah. No, it's one of those. It's one of those things. I think that people were fairly shocked when there was that rally for women, and the Prime Minister's response was, well, you're lucky you're not being shot at. Yes. Thanks very much. But there is a way to go. I think that's one of the issues that we need to continue working on.
And I suppose one of the interesting things about so many prominent and talented independents, and majority of them are women, we would see, you know, if more of those independents got, we would see more female representation in Parliament. You know, which is something that's obviously, you know, long overdue. And look, we're going to open up for questions, and there's going to be a microphone down here in the middle. So if people have a question for Sophie, then you can come into the centre. While you're sort of getting there, I'll ask her a couple of really, really tough questions. Sophie, what's the one thing you own that you really should throw out? And not your husband.
Oh, no, he's okay. I think most of us have a pair of pyjamas that probably have seen better days, but are actually really still very comfortable and should be thrown out.
That's it. Have you ever asked someone for an autograph?
Yes, you. I did on behalf of my sister.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
No,
she's a huge fan. She's a huge fan.
I signed a book. That's not the same.
Yeah.
Most used app on your phone?
It's actually WhatsApp at the moment, just because my family is spread all over the country, and that's how we keep in touch. It's a nice way to have a daily contact.
Okay, and the best thing about having your face on posters and cars all over Mackellar?
I think when it first started, I'd get honks and waves, and I'd think, oh my goodness, I've cut them off, or I've got a flat tyre, or my dress is hanging out of the car, and then I would be like looking at them, and they'd be coming up to me, and anyway, they're waving and thumbs up. So that was really fun. Yeah. And
the worst thing about having your face on posters and cars all over Mackellar?
Well, I think it's worse for my 12-year-old daughter, the poor thing. But the worst thing is the fact that I can't just nip down to the shops in my tracksuit and Ugg boots. I can't get away with it.
I think I'd love the idea you embarrass your daughter. Okay, we have a question. Look, a question, not a polemic or an opinion, would be great. So a question for Sophie, thanks.
Yes. I'm not quite sure how much of the OxyContin affected you as a medical doctor, but I had a very bad experience in my life. I was engaged to a lovely lady, and her doctor, which is my doctor as well, and he put her on OxyContin, and she lost her children, she lost her house, she lost everything she owned, and I knew it was heroin, and I told him it was heroin. I'd studied it a great deal, and it's still, he prescribed it for her, and it was a total disaster.
No, thank you. So OxyContin is a morphine derivative and highly addictive, and has been a real problem, particularly in America and also in Australia. I was very fortunate here to work in a very good practice at Narrabeen, so we're very strong on what we prescribe and what we don't prescribe. And if anyone needed medication like that, it would definitely need to come from a pain specialist. But I understand that it's caused a lot of distress and trauma and devastation for a lot of people. So I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Anyway, just come forward if you've got it, and just.
Thanks, Anya. Thanks, Sophie and Michael, for tonight. It's been wonderful. I'm Ray Harding. I'm a retired podiatrist from Narrabeen. So I've known Sophie for many years.
He saved my feet. He kept me on the track running. He's amazing.
Thank you. I was very fortunate to see the National Press Club address today when Craig Foster gave his speech. And obviously a very emotional guy, and he's an advocate for climate change, but also an advocate for disadvantaged people and refugees. And he spoke a lot about the terrible history that Australia has in incarceration of Indigenous people, but also refugees. And at the end of his address, there were question times, and a journalist asked him if we needed a Bill of Rights. And he said, yes, definitely. What would be your response to that?
I would 100% agree with that. We've got some legislation, but it's very patchy and doesn't give us the protections that we need as Australians. So I would definitely be supportive of an overarching human Bill of Rights. Just on Aboriginal incarceration, I think Australia has one of the lowest ages or the youngest ages for people to be able to be incarcerated. So what that means is there's a lot of 10-year-old Aboriginal children that are locked up in jail, and sometimes, they can't look after them in, special centres, and so they might even spend time in adult centres as well. So it's absolutely horrific, and there's work going on at the moment to raise that to at least 12. They might not get to 14, so that's a huge issue. I think also just on refugees, I think we were all shocked when Novak Djokovic's whole scenario played out, and we realised that there was a much bigger story going on, and that was these poor people who had been in indefinite detention for 8, 9, 10 years. And I think we were all shocked as Australians to realise that that was happening under our watch. Basically, they had, forgotten about them, and that was unacceptable. I think that indefinite detention's just not humane.
What do you say? But anyway, if you've got come up. Honestly, just come up to the front. I'm going to ask you a question while I'm waiting for you. What do you say to people who talk about, whether independence can make a difference?
Oh, right. No, that's a great one. I would say, so first of all, the big difference that an independent makes is that they are free. They have the freedom. There's no intervening party, so they are free to actually genuinely represent their community. So they have that authenticity. So as an independent, I will listen to and I will consult with the community, and there's no one breathing down my neck. There's no party machine telling me how to vote. There's no Barnaby Joyce saying, vote for this mine. I am free to vote with my conscience every time, and that will reflect what the community wants, their values, their concerns. So it's that direct representation that actually is real democracy. So that's one thing. And then, as I mentioned before, it's often the independents like Helen Haynes and Zali who are leading on these incredibly important issues. So Zali has led Australia on climate change, and she's dragged the current government kicking and screaming along with her. So although people might say she hasn't got her bill up, the fact is she's spotlit the issue of climate change in the media and the public discourse, and we're all, and governments act from pressure from the community, and so the pressure is building and building and building, and we will get there. And we can see that here, that so many people are talking about climate change and asking for action on climate change. And then as well, the other issue, Helen Haynes, is that Federal Integrity Commission, again being led by an independent who is listening to their community saying, we're not happy with the level of corruption going on in our government. We need to do something about it. And it's something that the government has also tried to keep hidden in the shadows, and it's the independents who are leading on that. So one is leadership. Two is you can bring things into the public domain because, again, you have that freedom to do so. You're not dictated to by the party. And three is the absolute genuine representation of directly representing your community and listening to them.
Excellent. Thank you.
And now that I'm here, you actually took my preempted my question.
Sorry.
Oh, let's see if I can add to it.
So, but once again, lovely, engaging conversation. Thank you. So I don't know. I suppose I was maybe going to phrase it in a way of some people would say that unless you're in one of the major parties, you can't really affect change. I don't know if that's a slightly different angle or not, but there's no harm in practising the answer again. I guess.
No, that's good.
Oh, well, or even to reframe, I mean, a lot of people will say something like, you know, I've always voted Labor, I've always voted Liberal. Why should I change?
Why should you change? I think, well, one, a vote for me is a vote for the home team. I'm the home side. A lot of people who have voted all their lives a particular way, and we're hearing this from a lot of coalition voters at the moment, feel that the party no longer represents them. So even though that they have spent their lives voting a particular way, they feel like they no longer are representing them and not sure who they are representing or what they stand for. So to have an independent as a viable option, it really does provide that option, a different option. And in many ways, it's a step sideways. Maybe voting Labor would be a bridge too far, but it's a step sideways. So I am offering that safe pair of hands on the economy and for small business and for families to stay strong on that type of thing, but at the same time, getting action on the issues that we all care about as well, which is climate change, which is health, which is integrity, which is, gender equity, so many different issues. And so you're getting the best of both worlds, I'd say. Yeah.
Hi, Sophie. I'm Stephen. The childcare workers in Australia and aged care workers in Australia are paid tragically low wages, even though they're doing incredibly important work. And at the same time, we've got multinational companies operating in Australia, making massive profits and often paying little or even no tax. Now, the two things necessarily aren't directly correlated, but generally speaking, perhaps they are on the other hand. But I'm wondering if you'd like to comment on those two things. Thanks.
Thank you. No, that they're both very, very valuable comments because, yes, we do. I mean, I think it's very important that we do get the multinationals to start paying their way. There's a huge amount of revenue that is avoided because they're not paying their tax and not paying their dues in Australia, and I think that there's probably bipartisan support for that to close those loopholes. But in terms of childcare workers and carers and aged carers and teachers, I agree. They're such valuable roles that those people hold, and they're not being valued. You have nurses on strike because, one, well, they're not paid well, but also they're striking because they're concerned about the level of care they can provide for patients, and they're worried that it's unsafe. The same thing is happening in aged care institutions across the country. We've heard non-stop throughout the pandemic the stories of neglect and vulnerable people being left, in situations that we would hope none of us or our loved ones would ever be left in. And so we do have to value the work that these people do. The aged care workers, I think, are paid sometimes, 2/3 of what a nurse is paid. So, and then you also hear that 1 in 5 aged care workers. Sorry. Oh crap. Sorry, Norris. You all right? What's happening? Quick, they need a doctor.
It's either that or a marriage proposal.
Thank you. 1 in 5 aged care workers are considering leaving the profession at the end of 12 months, and so we're going to be in a dire situation, so something does need to be done to address those issues.
It was said, Sharma from Wentworth recently said, if we get rid of the, quote, moderates out of the Liberal Party, we'll end up with a Republican Party. My question is, and I'll give you my opinion first, I think we're already there. I'd actually like both of your opinions on that.
Okay, thanks, Norris. Thanks, Norris. I'll go first. So, yes, we have a number of people in the coalition who call themselves moderates, but the issue is that they vote the same as Barnaby Joyce and the other Nationals every single time. So even though they might pay lip service to being a moderate, when it comes to voting and you look at the voting record, it's exactly the same as climate deniers and conspiracy theorists. And the thing that's happened is it comes down, so when you think about a party needs to represent 70 or more electorates, and they may be very, very diverse. And when you think about how different we are here on the Northern Beaches to, say, something in central Queensland where their livelihoods depend on mining. So how does one party represent an entire, that range of electorates? And what happens is the safe seats get ignored, and we have been a safe seat. We voted Liberal for the last 70 years, and so we are one of the safest seats. But the swing seats are the ones that are needed to win the election, so they're the ones that get listened to. And quite often, in recent years, they've been mining seats and the Nationals. And so that's why the Nationals are able to run the agenda and dictate policy. And really, that's why a lot of our so-called moderates don't have the freedom to vote how their community would like them to vote.
I think it's quite interesting that, obviously Dave Sharma and Trent Zimmerman are considered moderates, but Jason Falinski, our member, has quite clearly stated that he's not a moderate. He doesn't regard himself as a moderate. And so in the case of here in Mackellar, it's not as though Sophie's standing against a moderate sort of pro-climate change, doing something about it, Liberal. That's not what Jason Falinski has said he is. He's, if anything, he's gone tip further to the right over recent months.
Sophie, we spoke a little bit earlier. Can I take you a little bit away from your core focus of climate and health? Because as an independent, if you get elected and with the other independents, you're quite likely to hold the balance of power, in which case you're going to have some very important voting to do on every aspect of government of this country. One of them that's of particular interest to me and always has been through my life is education. And I'd just like to get your comments on education, particularly funding, and not only for schools but for universities as well.
Thank you. Yes, amazing question. So I guess the first part of that question was considering every single piece of legislation that comes before you. So independents do, that's the difference between having a backbencher and an independent. The independents do consider every single piece of legislation that comes before them. So they do the research, they go back to their communities. Well, if you're a community-backed independent, like I would hope to be, go back and consult with your community, what are the views and values, and you try and reflect that on that piece of legislation. if you're a backbencher, what happens is and this story is quite startling when you don't know it, is you wear a pager. The pager tells you when a vote is on and how to vote. And so that's the level of engagement on a lot of legislation that a lot of the time MPs will not know what they're voting on or have the detail about what's happening. And that story comes from Vale. So that's exactly right. An independent does consider every piece of legislation. I know that the current independents do collaborate on the research that they do, help each other with that. That doesn't mean to say they vote the same way, because they are, again, quite diverse electorates. When you think about Helen Haynes, she's regional Victoria, and Zali Steggall is, coastal Sydney. They might vote differently depending on what the legislation is. So that's one thing. And then also coming down to education, one of the things that horrified me during the pandemic was the loss of thousands of jobs in the university sector. That was horrifying. And then the other thing that happened was the raising the cost of the humanities degree as well. And I thought, what a crazy thing to do, because we have an unknown. The future is unknown, particularly now. We don't know what the next 10, 20, 30 years are going to be like. And we need critical thinkers who have knowledge of the context and the history to be able to take us forward and make informed decisions and, take us into that future. So I just think it's crazy. So I'm all for, as you probably heard, I've done a lot of study in my life. I find that constant endeavour and learning is so important for our society, and so I would like to see the university tertiary education much better funded, and also just primary and the other primary schools, secondary schools. I would like there to be a choice whether you go public or private, and people who do decide to go public to have the same level of education that people who choose to go private have as well. So I've got children. I've got one in the public system and two in the private system. They're different children. And then we also think about Australia doesn't have universal access to preschool care and early childhood education. So that's another really important issue that we need to consider. Those early years are absolutely vital, fundamental to the development of children into adults and how they achieve in life, and so it's an important investment to actually give money for childcare. And also the other thing, when you think about early universal access to affordable childcare, is that it allows women or carers to go re-enter the workplace, and that has huge benefits for the productivity of our economy as well. So there's lots of different things to consider. But definitely education is a huge issue for this country, yep.
Okay, we'll take two more questions.
Okay. Sophie, getting back to climate change and the Queensland electorates, the people who are frightened of losing their jobs, there's been some very good thinking done by very smart people like Ross Garnaut, that we have a wonderful opportunity to use the cheapest energy available on this planet, the richest ore bodies, to combine those in regional industrial areas. Now, this is long-term planning, and how do you, as an independent, feel that you can influence and lay down those sort of long-term planning principles which are going to ultimately make great gains for this country, but maybe not by the next election?
Thank you.
Why don't we can make it?
Exactly. They're wonderful comments. Thank you very much. Exactly. The lack of vision or lack of long-term vision has been one of the problems over the last few decades, and that's been we've been hamstrung by that lack of vision. So hopefully what I would like to do as an independent, or the independents can do, is you bring that decision making back from the fringes back to the sensible centre, so that you can work on those visions, you can work on those long-term goals, because I won't be worried about what my next role is, what ambition I have, whether I'm going to get into the cabinet. That this will be the ultimate thing representing my community. So I'm not going to be worried about, whether I'm going to get a cabinet role or not. Yeah, treasurer. So I think that we can be very genuine when we have those discussions as well, and hopefully there's more independence in. We need another 2 or 3 independents to really change the environment in Canberra and really bring that debate to something that can involve long-term planning and really change the environment in Canberra as well. Yep.
Hi, Dr Sophie. My question harks back to the education comment earlier, but also I've heard you use the word centre quite a few times, and I'm wondering how you've mentioned, for instance, you have children in public and private school. Could you talk a little bit, please, about how you feel about the sell-off of public assets and the privatisation of public assets, and how that impacts on the cost of living for people, and what you think is the best way forward?
Thank you. Lots of questions. Look, I think that the sale of public assets is probably short-term, short-sighted, and like you said, ends up costing the average person more money as the organisations try to make more money out of these what should be public services. So, and one of the biggest examples of that is the public-private partnership with our local hospital, which is the only one, I think there were 5 others that were in the pipeline, and when they realised how this Northern Beaches hospital was functioning, they all got put to the side and they haven't gone forward. So what's happened with that public-private partnership is that the people on the Northern Beaches don't have access to the public specialist services that you would have in other parts of Sydney. So really, when I would refer a patient, basically the option was to go privately. So there's a huge out-of-pocket expense there. And so that's just one example of, privatising what should be a public service. Health is a human right, and we all have the right to top quality health care. And that's not happening here in the Northern Beaches in Mackellar. Because you have to drive to the North Shore Hospital if you want to get that, and there's usually a long wait list as well. Where else should we go with this? Schools. Sorry, a few comments? Transport.
In terms of the sell-off of selling off of sort of public bus services to private bus services and the like. I'm assuming they're sort of.
Well, then it doesn't. What happens is if you sell it off, then the motive is to make money. It's not to serve the community. So then that's when you start. If you're talking about transport and the privatisation of the bus services, then you lose services basically, and that's the problem. I do think that the government does have a responsibility to provide some services, such as transport, such as healthcare, such as high quality education. All these things they're not. They're things that are human rights and that a wealthy country should be providing, without too many problems, I think.
And quite a few are state government issues rather than, federal government issues as well. We're going to wrap it up in a second. I just want to ask one last question before we go. I mean, your opponents often like to refer to independents, as Climate 200 candidates, and try to make out that this is not grassroots. Can you I want to tell everyone just how grassroots this campaign is. Yes. Oh, you see a lot of T-shirts.
There's a lot of the people the people who've started this are in. Some of us are in this room. So, Anyo Geddes, who introduced us, and Louise, she started the Voices of Warringah, and we heard about that. But really, this came from our own concerns and talking to people in our own networks and hearing from people that they weren't feeling heard. And the response to that was, well, if we want to be genuinely represented, if we want to be heard, then we need to find out what actually is important to this electorate. So that's where the Voices of Mackellar came in, and that similarly was, we heard through the grapevine that there were some other women thinking about this. So we got together, 6 of us, and we started Voices of Mackellar, and there were hundreds of volunteer hours put into that to purely listen to people. It wasn't telling them anything. We would have these small group conversations, basically sitting around a kitchen table, and listening. And the questions that we were asking and recorded were basically, what issues are important to you? That was the fundamental question. What is important to you locally? What's important to you nationally? What type of, do you feel that you're heard? What type of representative would you like to see? And people were saying we want somebody who views the role as one of service, not as some sort of career path, serving the community. That was a huge theme that came through for us. And we were just hearing it over and over and over again. At the end of these kitchen table conversations, people would say, well, because one of the other things we asked about was what solutions would you like to see? And the solution that people were coming up with time and again was, well, we need an independent like Zali next door. We need someone to, where's this group? Who's where are they? And we were hearing that so often that in the end, Anyo and I decided to step aside from the voices and start, as I said before, start Mackellar Rising. And that was because we knew that there was this need and this want and this drive within the community. And as soon as we started that, there was hundreds of people coming on board. It's been a phenomenal thing. And really...
Yeah, that's what I want sort of people to get a sense of, just how many people are now on board. I mean,
there's I'm
hundreds
actually,
and hundreds and hundreds.
I'm blown away myself just seeing all the photos and what people are getting up to. It blows me away. Standing in the rain, by the road, waving with their T-shirts and their signs. There's people all across, and even I'm just hearing all the time that, they go into a car park and there's, like 10 stickers with Dr. Sophie on it and things like this. So people are feeling... The thing that I think we saw happen in Warringah next door was this real sense of optimism and hope and positivity that came up through the community, and you saw those Aqua T-shirts everywhere, and that's exactly what we want to replicate here, is that sense of hope. And one of the best things I've got to say since I've launched is that the number of people who've come up to me and said, thank you, because I feel hopeful for the first time in years. And so that's that sense of hope. And really it's the community stepping up and asking and demanding that we be heard. Because, sorry, I'm carrying on now, but we have, our voice has been missing from the national debate for many years now, and we absolutely deserve to be a part of that debate and deserve to be heard. So there.
Well done.